Hi, everyone. Welcome to the live. Welcome to the live. We are ready for an interview here. Are you guys ready for some YSL trial wrap up? It's hard to believe that it is now over after almost over a year and like a week or so. Welcome, everybody. Hit the like button. Let everybody know that we're here. We're going to be talking to Max Schardt and the world famous Mr. Kokumo. And there's a U in there. It's not all O's. The spelling of his last name. And then we also have a special guest who I'm sure you all will recognize from the live, but we'll take some questions in the chat. But I've got some questions to get going here. So hi, Denise. Hi, everyone. Thanks for saying hi. Let's get going here. We'll bring in the all-star team here who just came off a pretty great win for their client here. Let's see. Max and David Botts, thank you for joining us. Here we are.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, 2 p.m. in Atlanta, and we're so that's a good 48 hours plus a few hours removed from the verdict, right? So many of us watched this from around the country and even around the world. We weren't there at the courthouse. Can you tell us what it was like at the courthouse? I mean, do you remember? Did you black out?
It was so my recollection is probably going to be a little different than Mr. Botts. So we were in there. There was a status conference on the remaining clients, defendants that weren't in the first trial. So I was just, I was excited to see some of the young men that were initially with us, that, Mr. Mender, Mr. Garlington, who I've known, and so and others. And so I was just kind of being nosy. Mr. Bosch was with me, and then the light went on from the jury room. And I never knew this because I usually don't sit in the courtroom waiting on a verdict. I'm usually doing something else.
Yeah.
And apparently there's different colors.
Okay.
So the light was blue. And one of the DAs who I'm friendly with says, "Oh, don't worry. Blue just means a jury question."
Mm-hmm.
I said, "Okay, well, we don't have a verdict. It's just a jury question." So the judge kind of ended the status conference for those other gentlemen. And, then all of a sudden we took center stage and she said, "We have a verdict. We have two verdicts." Wow. And I was just like, "What?"
Yeah.
Like, I just wasn't expecting that because I was expecting them to ask us to play some video or something again. So I was like, okay. So then I looked at Shannon and I was like, I guess we have a verdict, Shannon. And then she read it so quickly for Mr. Kendrick.
Yeah, it was amazing.
And then the date thing, I figured that out pretty quickly. I was like, wait a second, they found Mr. Kendrick not guilty yesterday, and I've noticed him kind of focusing on Shannon, but I was thinking there's no way they could have different verdicts for the 2015 case.
Yeah.
So I felt good about that. And then the judge said, "We have a guilty verdict on count 64. And I said, okay. And I was like 90% sure. My mind just left for a minute about what count 64 was. Of course, I knew it, but it just wasn't computing at that moment. So then if you look, I went over to Doug and I said, you can't hear it, but I said, "Doug, count 64 is the gun charge, right?" And he was like, "Yeah." And he was happy, and he said, "I think so." And I was like, okay. So, but it worked out, and it was kind of a blackout moment. What do you remember, Mr. Botts?
Oh my God.
The judge said we have a guilty on the gun charge, count 64, and not guilty on all the other charges. That's exactly what she said. And so that was, to me, a major win.
Did you know at that moment? Because my mind just kind of left. Wasn't 100%. You knew. Okay.
And I said, whoa, because I was expecting, once you hear guilty, you say, oh God, what's the next thing going to be? What's the other charge? But she just immediately followed that with a not guilty on all other charges, which was how the jury wrote the verdict. And so immediately I began to think, oh God, he's going to get the maximum on the gun charge.
Mm-hmm.
State was asking to treat him as a recidivist, and the judge said, well, I have to give him the maximum as a recidivist. However, I can probate some of it.
Yes.
And so instead, she said, I'll give you the 10 years, which is the maximum, to serve 2 years, credit for time served, which he'd already served. And Max, before that verdict was reached, he asked to approach the judge, approached and said, if you're going to give him time, it's going to be a death sentence. You've got to give him, you got to do something. But then he said he noticed on the podium a sentencing manual that she had in front of her. And so he felt pretty good, and she kind of smiled and sent us back down for the sentencing. So it was actually a surprise all the way around for all of us. But probably the prosecution was more surprised than we were.
Well, I'll say this, just to put it in perspective. I had a feeling after when I went back, I had a feeling things were going to work out. But I want the public to understand, and I said this to the press the day of the verdict and sentencing. You as judges, typically, when you go to trial, their just instinct is to give the maximum. Like, you dared challenge the state. Some people call it a trial tax, and everyone says there's no trial tax, but in my experience, there is one.
Yeah.
So Judge Whitaker was so thoughtful in not just saying, okay, maximum 10 years, you take your 10 years. And I just thank her for that. And I give her so much credit for, understanding the totality of this case and understanding that the jury completely rebuked all those other charges. And we're just dealing with one gun charge, and that was the appropriate sentence. Because, other judges may have said, well, he was charged with all these other things, so I'm giving him the maximum. And that's not what she did. And we are so thankful for that. And that was not the easy thing to do.
And it sounded like for the people at home, there was a discussion up at the bench that we didn't see on camera, but that made you feel a little bit better going into the sentencing that she wasn't going to do that, right? Wasn't going to get the max. Can we be clear on that? This was like a
I'm not going to go into the specifics about what was said. I mean, it's going to be on a transcript, I'd imagine, because it was on the record. But I left that discussion. Let's just put it this way. I went back. I elbowed Shannon in the left ribs, as I'm prone to do. And I said, Shannon, it's going to be okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. And when you said you told the judge that any kind of sentence could be a death sentence for him, is that just because of the safety and the conditions of the jail or the prison? Or is it also because he had been acquitted of these charges and that could kind of put a mark on him in prison? Can you explain that?
At trial, we heard about 2 different attempts on his life. We also know that he was stabbed in the jail. We were never seriously considering a plea. But the understanding always, if there was going to be a plea, there was going to be facilitation from different agencies to make sure special accommodations were made for Shannon. So my concern was, if we're going to do the sentencing today, and it's going to be a sentence that's going to lead to incarceration, we can't do it today, because we have to get everything in place to facilitate that and keep him safe. But after that discussion, I felt like I was worrying about something I didn't need to worry about. Yeah. And I just need to sit down and let the sentence happen.
Because it seems pretty common in at least southern states that you have this kind of sentencing right after the verdict. Is that true? Is that pretty standard in Georgia State Court that you see that, or is there usually prep time because you have issues that you want to argue about, like you were saying?
No, it's very common to do it right after. I'm trying to think. There may have been a couple cases where it hasn't happened immediately, but that I can think of. But it's definitely 99.9. It's right afterwards.
Yeah. So one of my questions was going to be about what was it like getting from point A to point B when you heard that there was a question or there was a verdict. But as you said, you were already in the courtroom when that happened. When you weren't in the courtroom, when you were waiting for the jury, where were you? Was there an attorney room where you all were? Or can you kind of talk about the tension of that or what you did?
Well, there was an attorney room, if you want to call it. It was kind of like a cubby hole. But
Mr. Botts didn't seem too stressed.
No, I felt pretty good about the case. I really did, and and that's what I said to Shaq before that day began. Was I said they'll come back with a verdict today.
Can I tell them where everyone sat in the side room? Mr. Botts had a couch. I'm just going to put it like that. We'll just leave it at that. Mr. Botts had a couch, and Doug. It was funny because Doug is the social media guy. So he's sitting there. Mr. Botts is
resting,
taking a rest throughout the whole process in the side room on the couch. And Doug is just jabbering on with people from across the nation talking about who knows what on something live. And luckily I can work with snoring and talking going on in the background. So I was just working on other cases for those days. And so it's the three of us, and then Shaq and Youssef, who is an intern that works for Mr. Harvey. He came, he wanted to be part of the team and stick with us. So that was awesome. And so it was the three of us and then Youssef and Shaq. I think that was right. That was
that was it.
Somebody says, Dee says, domino effect happening. 6 defendant charges dismissed today. You and Doug didn't just help your clients. So many others are winning because of y'all too. How does that feel to read that comment? And can you take responsibility?
I don't even know what whose charges was on this case?
I did see Damone Blaylock's RICO charge was dismissed. I haven't seen the others, but I have not been keeping up in the last couple of hours. Okay. But I did see Thugger Daily report had the paperwork for Damone Blaylock's RICO charge being dismissed. So it sounds like there could be others. Was that expected? Was there any talk about that?
I mean, there was no talk about the other gentlemen. I mean, we were in our own universe. We knew that they were at the jail, except for Mr. Farley. But there was no discussion about anything like that. I mean, the one thing I'll say is people have a lot of problems with RICO, and I get it. We know when RICO kind of came to prominence, it was definitely not this situation that we dealt with in this case. A lot of people have problems with the way it was used. Ultimately, people vote and make decisions and choose, who's going to use. But as attorneys, all we can do is just make it as difficult as possible. If you're gonna bring a RICO, we just gonna fight for every inch, and just make it as because while it gives in some ways gives the state great advantage, we can also, fight tooth and nail, and I think we did that, not just us, but all the attorneys, to make it a lot less palatable that they're going to try these other gentlemen, in a similar way.
Yeah, because one issue I've seen, and at least in this case, is, I mean, the Georgia Criminal Defense Bar and the number of attorneys who could take this case on, especially when you've got 28 defendants, was limited. So, I mean, it's almost like you got your domino effect is kind of helping the fact that maybe there weren't enough attorneys to go around. It's like if you can just eliminate some cases by the lawyering of attorneys in one case, there you go. But do you think you've inspired some a kind of change in the Georgia Defense Bar, or maybe kind of a rekindling of of people who want to be defense attorneys in Atlanta?
I don't know. Most of the attorneys that I ran into were just like, it was just expressions of sorrow throughout this process. Like, Max, I'm sorry that you're still in this case. And, I always said, oh, it's not bad. I kind of liked it in many ways. But yeah, I don't think that necessarily we've inspired a bunch of attorneys that are going to be signing on to do 2+ year cases. I don't think that's going to happen. But
oh, I see. State filed motions to nolle prosequi. All of the, I'm probably mispronounced that, all the charges for Cleef Adams.
No problem.
Oh, okay. Damone.
Dismissed.
Okay, dismissed. Damone Blaylock, Javaris Bradford, Justin Cobb, Javon Fleetwood, and Jaden Myrick. Some of them were charged with murder, weren't they?
Pretty much.
Mr. Bradford was.
Yeah.
Cleef Adams.
No, Cleef Adams was.
Well, he was.
Javaris Bradford was. And I never really understood what that murder charge was based on. So that's awesome. Mr. Cobb, I don't think he's even. I don't even know where he is or if he's been arrested, but apparently that solves that problem. And then, the other thing that we have these 28 names on this indictment, and the idea that this is a RICO enterprise. And, I understand that under the laws of RICO, everyone doesn't need to know everyone. But in reality, if we're going to hold people accountable for the acts of others, you would think that people would know each other. And just look at the ages and the age range of this. It's like 2 different generations of young men that grew up on Cleveland Avenue. Really, it's almost like 3 different if you get into Antonio Sledge and some of the older guys, Demise McMullen. So it's a lot of these guys really didn't really have anything to do with Shannon Stillwell or Jeffrey Williams or anything. Like Jaden Myrick. He was just a disturbed young man that was in the jail that apparently wanted to make some money, but no one knew who he was.
Yeah. You mentioned Antonio Sledge. Somebody questioned because it did seem like the prosecutors had really tried to figure something out in the last few months. I mean, their case was just way too big from the beginning, but we all saw the increased number of prosecutors, the presence of a body, the 19 witnesses in one day thing. But more significantly, we saw Antonio Sledge's probation revoked for not testifying in accordance to his plea deal. And we also saw Simone take a pretty pointed stance on during Antonio Sumlin's testimony and really use his plea deal to get him to say that YSL, she definitely used it to get him to say that YSL members sold drugs out of the web. Did that kind of aggressive stance by prosecutors with Mongtung influence any kind of plea deal negotiations? I mean, did it scare people basically?
I don't think so, because I think I could be wrong, but what did we have? 5 or 6 plea deals kind of come in succession. None of those, I think if it did anything, it made the attorneys take a hard line that we are not signing up to testify and we are not agreeing to factual acknowledgments, because none of those gentlemen signed any sort of acknowledgments to my knowledge and understanding. And so, it's just, and I know Mr. Sledge's attorney. He's a great guy. He's a great attorney. And where this really went wrong and how Mr. Sledge ended up in this situation is just everyone, state got up and said, these guys are all dangerous when it was time to go for a bond hearing, which was unbelievable to me, because no one's read the discovery like me, except for maybe Brian. And I still don't understand what Ghana did. And so you're saying all these people are so dangerous they can't get bond. And then so you just have them in there, and the only way out, other than 2.5-year trial, is entering a plea, and then the state writes the factual acknowledgments and puts it in front of them, and then Mr. Sledge did sign it, but we use these terms, oh, it was freely and voluntarily given, it wasn't coercion, but you're sitting in jail without bond, and you're being told if you sign a document you go home. Like, if that's not coercion, I don't know what is. So that's just and imagine being an attorney representing Mr. Sledge, where he wants to get home to his sick mother, he wants to get home to his kids, and you got these factual acknowledgments, and then you're trying to thread that needle to make it happen, but also chip away at these, and the state's being difficult, and then you just come to the conclusion, well, let's do this and you can explain it later, which is what was said. And I can see that happen. But to me, it's not on attorney Wright, and I understand why the judge did what she did with Mr. Sledge, and I'm not going to second guess Judge Whitaker, but the problem was these guys were all locked up without bond, and so they didn't really have options. And then think about the other people. We talked about this last time, Meghann, about people that weren't able to even get attorneys for so long. Like, it's just broken.
Yeah. And I don't, obviously you don't know firsthand the other people's situation, but I noticed Demekion Garlington wasn't one of the ones mentioned as having his charges dropped. And just based on everything we've heard in trial, that makes sense. But when I was looking at why he wasn't on trial in this case, I saw something about how it was because he didn't have a lawyer. That's why he was severed early on. Do you know, has that situation changed at all?
My understanding is, I think he has 2 lawyers now. One I know well, and he's a great lawyer. So, hopefully things work out, but it looks like they're, I have no inside information about any negotiations or anything going on.
Yeah. Do you think the attention that the trial got might have contributed to some lawyers taking attention to this case? Because before the circle was so small, it was criminal defense lawyers in the Atlanta area, but you've probably been contacted by, have you been contacted by attorneys around the country? Is there more interest in this from people trying to help or offer advice? Maybe unwanted advice.
Offer advice. Attorneys, no, I've received several dozens of emails from different attorneys, even from prosecutors, like from different states, saying, keep fighting. Keep pushing, and congratulatory emails when this came through. Now, advice, if I had hair, I would have pulled it out, because Meghann, I appreciate everyone. Yeah. But gosh darn it, the people, the internet sleuths that acted like I didn't know what was on that drinks video, and acting like I wasn't going to bring it up, and I needed to be told, and I needed to be tagged in every post, and I needed to be called, and voicemail after voicemail after voicemail from every state in the union. And our friend Thugger Daly actually did me a solid.
That. Yeah.
And he's like, I think Max knows what's on the video. Y'all can stop tagging him.
Yeah, let Max cook, I think he said.
Yeah. And I was so appreciative of that. I understand the interest, but it was kind of like, wait a second, I'm asking these questions in a way that are leading you to the conclusion, but you don't think I know what the conclusion is. Like, that's why I'm asking these questions. Yeah. And the other thing is, I was kind of thinking I'm holding something in my pocket that maybe the other side might not be 100% on right now. So I'm like, y'all are telling my secret right now on the internet.
Right, because they made it pretty clear that they were paying attention to the social media hype. You know, I think that's one thing that could be studied in law schools, and there could be a big ABA journal article about what it was like for the attorneys and just the court staff and everyone to have so much publicity on this case and how that changed things in the courtroom. I mean, or if it did. I mean, how it definitely changed things for you guys just in how you dealt with your everyday lives and kind of trying to deal with this. But did it change what you did in the courtroom or help you or sometimes hurt you just as you worried it might become a distraction?
To me, no, I didn't pay attention to it. Max and some of the others were on constant look at the computer to see what comments were made during the trial. And some of the comments would be helpful, and some of them were just totally by people that were unaware of what was going on. But yeah, it has some influence. It's just the way things are nowadays, is that people do pay attention to social media. And a lot of the trial was all about social media.
Oh, it was. Yeah.
That the defendants had taken part. It was a huge part.
Well, we actually, that was one of my disagreements with Shannon was the different feeds. I liked Law and Crime when things were bad. I like getting the perspective of non-jurors. And, you know, obviously there's a lot of YSL fans and, you know, that they were always going to say, but there was some people that were more objective. And I like seeing negative comments because I know what's out there and what I need to worry about. But Shannon, he didn't like seeing negative comments. So he'd always want to get out of more. And I said, Shannon, seeing the negative comments helps us because we know what we need to do. But that was kind of a funny thing. But yeah.
How did the clients and Shannon and keep up with all the coverage? Was there, because I mean, we saw you guys at the defense table, and like you said, there is a legitimate legal strategy to reading these comments. It's not like you're just screwing around on the internet when you're doing that. So did you have set times that you would kind of do updates, or was it just periodic that you would look at things?
We would just look at things periodically.
Yeah. Gosh.
When you're not actually talking or cross-examining or presenting evidence or anything like that, and you got time, and there was a lot of kind of off time when we knew what the witnesses were going to say and what cross-examination would be, that we had to watch the trial and see the comments. And so, yeah, it was helpful. And Shannon was especially, you know, it's kind of boring sometimes to him. And so he would be active in the part of, in telling us things that they're saying, or what do you say about this? But we let him do that because that's what he's used to.
Yeah.
And plus they were receiving nothing while in the jail, no newspapers, no updates, no news. So it was kind of refreshing for him to be able to watch something.
Oh, yeah.
Participate.
Yeah. Somebody, Ali asked, what led you to become a defense attorney, Max, and mentor young men and work with the Next Level Boys Academy? And if you can talk about what that is. They're in Atlanta, right?
Right. So the first part, what led me to become a defense attorney, I was one of those people that went to law school and didn't really, I didn't know any lawyers and I didn't have it figured out. And I just couldn't see myself sitting in an office all day. That's just not me. I think people have seen my nervous energy and kind of the energy I walk around with, and I have trouble sitting still. So that wasn't really going to work. And then, you know, I think I told you this last time. In college, I just, the sweetest kid, the most humble kid, got charged with a federal crime. And, you know, all of a sudden we're playing basketball in the gym and he's got a ankle monitor on. And like, what? He got charged with and, you know, this is just a computer geek. And, you know, he got charged federally for some U.S. currency stuff that he was kind of dragged into by other people. He was just the guy who knew how to use a computer. And so I just thought that was very unfair. and that's kind of made me start thinking about criminal defense. And so I began as a public defender in Columbia, South Carolina, where I went to college, and I took the job very seriously. Next Level Boys Academy, I've been working with them for about 5 years now, and I'm a strong believer in, be the change, don't talk about it, take action. And Mr. Gary Davis, who heads that program, he's just someone that's taken upon himself to not talk about it, but get young people together that have some challenges, a lot of them with the legal system, and just talk through things and build a sense of camaraderie and love and positivity. And so I love being part of that, and just trying to make the world a better place.
One gross generalization I've heard about juries is that after a verdict, when they're coming out to deliver the verdict, you can tell if they've acquitted a client or a defendant because they're willing to look over at the defendants. And did you have any of those superstitions or beliefs going in? And did you see any of that play out when the jury walked out? I mean, it was such a fast moment, but what were you thinking there from their body language or their looks? Anything?
Well, I've been around a little longer than Max, and so I can tell you that we always think that. But I watched every one of them come out, and only one really looked over our way and kind of grinned a little bit, but she was always in a happy mood anyway. And so I really couldn't tell. It was kind of like when they came out for questions. It was almost like they purposefully didn't look at us.
Right. Yeah, no, my experience was the same. I think I had slight eye contact with one of the jurors, but it wasn't anything that gave anything away. But I did notice, just in my experience, especially in a case like this, which I thought we had, by the end of the trial, we had a very legitimate chance of winning. I felt in something that, in a case where the jurors had been around my client for over a year, I noticed that they did not seem to be tense, and they seemed to be kind of relieved when they came out, and I took that as a good sign. They didn't make any faces or anything, but they didn't have the look of a group of people that were sending someone that they had been around for a year to prison for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
And bear in mind, the way the trial started out was we were surrounded by sheriffs and marshals in the courtroom everywhere.
Yeah, that's another good
There
point.
was about 10 of them in there that we would count. And when we came into the courtroom, we actually had our bags searched the second time. We had to go through the general population barrier, and they would go through the metal detectors and all that, and we clear it. And that gets you in any other place in the courtroom except for this trial, anywhere. And so when we go in there, they would pull out everything out of our bag that had already been searched by the metal detectors and the sheriff's deputies and everything. And then we go into the courtroom, and they're just standing all behind you and all of that. And yeah, we worried about what a jury would think about, well, these guys must be pretty bad. If you got this many people trying to, or either something may happen in here.
Yeah.
And another thing that Mr. Botts, I think, is saying is when the verdict came in, when it's not going your way, you tend to see dozens of deputies all of a sudden in the room waiting for an emotional outburst or to tackle someone, and see all those deputies. So when I think back, that was a sign too, but I didn't really catch it at the time. I was just, everything happened so fast.
And that's because a few of the sheriffs told us that we think you win in the case. And I remember one especially commented and complimented really Max on one of his brilliant cross examinations of the witness. You got that right.
Wow.
And
do you remember who it was?
Now Mr. Botts is telling secrets. Mr. Botts, you don't remember anything.
Remember
He's
who the
telling
witness
secrets.
was?
Stop, Mr. Botts.
Can you say who the
said
witness
he
was?
made a great examination. That was not a secret.
Can you say who the witness was, just for the record, or?
No, it wasn't a witness. It was
No, he's saying
or who the witness was that he cross-examined that the deputy complimented. We don't need the deputy's name.
Well, there was more than one, but there were several deputies that we got a good feeling from. The ones that were supposed to be guarding us, all of a sudden, I think became accustomed to, these guys are not any problem. They're not going to cause us any trouble. Right. And hopefully the jury picked up on that. Instead of somebody standing over them all the time, they'd actually talk with them and communicate, and they were humanized.
Right. And that was actually, I put some thought into that, and I will say we put some thought into that. And I will say that the deputies that were in there were so professional. Mm-hmm. But and this but is not saying that they weren't professional, but they were also human. And so anytime there was a friendly interaction between Shannon and law enforcement, even if they're just playing around, because we all knew each other at that point for so long, and there's a level of trust and respect between the deputies and my client and the deputies in Jeffrey. The more interactions that are just normal, and it just looks like these are not hardened guys, but guys that even in this situation are able to interact with law enforcement and smile and joke and kid, I thought it was good. Mm-hmm. And we did have some of that. And there needed to be some of that, because, no one could go a year plus or 2 years and just everything's law and order and strict regiment. That was just unrealistic.
Yeah. Ashley asked if did one of the jurors wear a Boys in the Hood shirt the day the verdict was announced? Did you notice that, of all the details in the courtroom?
I did notice it, and it didn't really sink. It was like, I was like, oh, okay. But then I was, I didn't really take it for the message that probably.
And it was investigator. Sorry to interrupt. It was investigator Dennis, right? Who testified. Was it Dennis who testified right. that he watched Boys in the Hood, and that was some of he had cited that in testimony, and then it was like, oh, so right. that's what informs your experience here is Boys in the
right.
Hood. But okay,
that was one of those clues that I could have probably picked up on, but again, I was on the verge of passing out. So
yeah, and all hell breaks loose after a verdict is read. I remember a judge I know in Orange County said that he was once ordered to duck under the bench by the deputies because all the family members in the courtroom were freaking out. What was it like in the moments after the verdict? This was celebration overall, wasn't it? Except for the victims' families, but I understand Drinks' family left pretty quick.
I don't remember. I just remember hugging Shannon, and then I remember going to we spoke to the jurors, but it was kind of like I wasn't able to comprehend anything else that was going on around me at that point.
There was, I looked, and there was no reaction, because the visitors, the family, and all that were told by the judge that I'm going to read the verdict and I want absolutely no outbursts or no emotion or anything like that. And they honored that. So you heard nothing come from them.
And I'll say this, I try to always mention this, and I don't know if it will. I'm saying this in good faith and trying to help. I don't know if it does in any way, but the Drinks family, they showed up every day towards the end, because that's when we were dealing with Mr. Drinks's death. And they've been through a lot.
Yeah.
And the Thomas family too. But I would see the Drinks family more because it's a small hallway. I mean, it's a small hallway and everyone's in there. We got girlfriends, we got victims' families, we got attorneys running around. We have everyone in this small hallway. And so I'd walk past them and I would always kind of acknowledge them, shake my head, and they would acknowledge me and they would smile, and there was no animosity. And, just a level of, obviously I'm doing my job, but some people don't take it that way. And the level of grace that some people show, it just kind of blows my mind. And, I wish that family nothing but the best.
Yeah. Wow.
I didn't talk to them, but they seem like very nice people.
That's good to hear, because that had to have been such a stressful situation for everyone involved to have the victims and the
Right.
defendants all kind of right there in the mix. But it sounds like everybody was there was never any major issue, it sounds like, that day or any other days.
No, there was not at all. And we need to get to a place at the end of this, and I'm working on it. We need to get a place where the verdict is the verdict, and all the back and forth and violence and street justice needs to stop.
Yes.
And we need to get to a point, and I don't know if we're there yet, where the jury's verdict is respected, and we are rooting for everyone to move on, to be productive and successful. And that includes Shannon, that includes Kenneth Copeland, that includes Jeffrey, that includes Kelvin Watts, that includes the Drinks family, the Thomas family. And that's where I want, there's needs to be some healing, and I hope we get there.
And what is Shannon's current situation right now? Because he's not out, but he has some pending cases, but it looks like they're getting resolved. Can you update us on that?
I've encouraged everyone to, and I hope my tone is reflecting that, to be humble and move with humility, and because Shannon does still have some matters. They are nothing like this. Yeah. I've had preliminary discussions. The prosecutors I've talked to have been nothing but professional, and I'm hoping that maybe by the end of next week, we'll be able to resolve those. Now, there's also the matter of what happens to Shannon at the end of this, when he is released. And I had a very long conversation. I love having these conversations. We couldn't have conversation. Shannon always wanted to talk about his future throughout this whole trial for 2 years. And I kept cutting him off because A, I wanted to focus on the case, but B, I'm just superstitious, and I didn't want to talk about your future while we're facing 2 life without paroles plus 1 million years. I said, we got to win this. And so now we're at that point. So yesterday we had a long talk about his future. I'm not going to reveal the details, but let's just say it was a discussion about staying off of social media. That's not real life. Yeah. It was a discussion about moving forward, being humble, moving with positivity and love, and being a family man and being there for your children. And he's very much interested in doing that. He's had a tough life, so it's not, everything is not, when people are trying to kill you for 8 years, it's easy for me to say that, but the reality is we are now in a situation where he can be a father for his children. He can be a husband. He can be a great grandson, and we're just working out the logistics. And I hope he seizes this opportunity, and he knows he has us in his corner. So,
yeah. And his kids were there in the courtroom for the verdict and sentencing. Were they?
Yes.
3?
4.
4. And some of them are teenagers. Or do you know how old they are? Various ages.
Various ages, but I would say, I think one of them might be a teenager now.
Yeah.
But they all love him dearly, and it's just a lot of, I don't know, man. It's a lot of good people. Even Miss Alexander testified. I don't know if that was the young lady whose gun.
He got convicted
right. He was convicted of that one charge. It was registered to her. And we didn't even, in my closing, I didn't even fight that. That was for purposes of maintaining credibility with the jury. I didn't mention that because I didn't want to start arguing about something that was tough to argue. But my point, Miss Alexander, she shows up, and in some ways, she's had people were talking about her online, and she was showing up on those last days. She brought me a beautiful picture of me and Shannon that she got put on canvas. And she was just, and this is before the verdict came, and she was just so appreciative. And, his grandmother was there, and she was so appreciative. And so there's good people in his corner. It's just, there's a lot of complications in his life that we need to sort out. And I just want everyone to move forward in peace and love.
Yeah. I mean, have you ever been co-counsel with a client's wife before?
Oh, no. And when I didn't mention Kayla, I didn't mean to leave her out. She's been very supportive too. The one thing that, I'm just trying, obviously she's excited about getting Shannon home. And, I'm just trying to temper her enthusiasm with, let's just stay off social media and let's just take it slow and be humble and work this out the way it needs to be worked out, and good things will happen.
Yes. Yeah. And like you were saying, there's still some cases to resolve, but you're hoping by the end of next week to have some
I hope so.
Some good news, or for him to be out, or either one would be great news, but you're hoping for some resolution by end of next week, he said.
Right. Yeah, I'm hoping.
Yeah. Gosh. Well, somebody was saying Mr. Kokumo must be in Miami, but he
there's some sort of art festival or something. My wife explained it to me.
Yeah.
Because I told Mr. Kokumo he doesn't need to go to Miami, and then my wife said, cut him some. My wife is like his defense attorney. She said, cut him some slack. He's Art. There it is. Art Basil. There it is.
Yeah. The jury interviews, we are all seeing the jurors talk. And did you watch the big 3-hour interview that Melanie did with it was one juror and 2 alternates, and there's been some other discussions, but I'm wondering if anything surprised you from these interviews at all.
I saw parts. You're talking about the one that Shaq was on. I saw parts. I'm always worried about putting myself in an echo chamber. So a lot of people were saying online, ain't no way they're convicting, this is nonsense. And, I'm always more pessimistic. I was like, it's not that easy. We're not out the woods, but it was, and I was like, well, these are people that are following me, which means they're rooting for us. So it's self-selecting group that's making these comments. But it was actually surprising to me how similar the views of those jurors were with all the people that were saying things online. I mean, that was really.
Yeah. Oh, I see people saying Kokumo's in the chat. Jack, if you check if you check your Instagram DMs, there should be a link to get into the StreamYard if you can. But we'll wait for you here. But One thing the trial has revealed, especially in the end, was, I mean, the third car and really the fourth car in the drinks video was arguably a defensive smoking gun. And did you guys see it that way going forward? I admittedly have not watched your opening statement since opening statements, but how much did those cars, were they mentioned in the opening statements?
So first of all, Mr. Botts was the first one. He's gonna yell at me if I don't say this. Mr. Botts was the first one. Mr. Botts is really into cars, and he was the first one to really point out what we all eventually saw. But that being said, my recollection is opening statement. I said, you will see on video a client in the BP gas station having fun with his friends without a care in the world, nothing indicating that some homicide's about to take place. And then you will see a video from FedEx, and it's going to be grainy, but when it's all said and done, it will point to my client's innocence. I said something to that effect.
Okay.
But I didn't, I mean, Meghann, sometimes, and the public might not completely understand that, and that was potentially part of my frustration, is sometimes you hold things in your pocket until it's time. And so the video and the intricacies of the video and the details in the video were something that I was holding. We never had any discussions about that with the state, trying to get a resolution, like, look at the video. We held that to ourselves.
And that was a strategy because we weren't sure exactly what the expert witnesses and all that were going to say.
Right.
And so we had our defense, but he didn't portray it in the opening statement because that would have locked him in.
And also it would have potentially, affected testimony of people later. But once
don't give away your strategy.
Right. But once the ME gave her honest testimony and talked about the effects of that gunshot wound and immediately losing any ability to consciously move your body, and such as moving your foot up and down, at that point I was like, okay, we got what we need. It's a full go. Yeah. And so, but I was holding on, we were just kind of, holding on to that one in our back pocket, basically.
Yeah. I see somebody saying I should email Shaq the link. I don't have his email, but if he drops it in the chat, I'll try to get him the link.
Do people really want Shaq? Is that, I mean, really?
I think he's kind of the, I think there are a lot of people who want to see him, but do you remember, I can't imagine you forgot about that, but I think it might still be my favorite moment in trial when Judge Glanville yelled at you, Attorney Botts, and you just kind of let it roll off your back. You didn't seem to mind.
It did roll off my back. He never bothered me and never has. And he knows that I've respected him as a judge, but that particular time he was really not doing right. He was out of order. I was trying to tell him something, and that had happened in the hall that was relevant to one of the rulings, and that was when he was getting into the rift with Brian also. And he said something like, I don't care for you anymore, or something like that. And I said, well, I don't care.
Yeah, that's fine.
You said that's fine.
I said that's fine. If you want to feel that way, but I've done what I had to do.
And one of our supporters made T-shirts for all of us, and I think he's got a T-shirt that said, like, that's fine or something.
Well, it says, I don't care for you anymore, or something like that. And I had on the back of it, that's fine. But also I took up for Max in front of him too, at the beginning of the trial when he falsely accused Mac and Shannon.
The one day the cameras weren't there, I almost got locked up, and people don't know about that. But Mr.
Was that mentioned was there a filing about that? I seem to remember reading about this.
It was in my motion. What was it? the motion for mistrial with prejudice, where I laid out all my grievances. But I was accused of yelling at the judge in open court, and I didn't. And then apologies were demanded, and we went through this big thing about you're lying to the court, and I said no, you're asking me to lie to the court, and so we just went through this big thing. And Mr. Botts, without saying exactly what happened, Mr. Botts cleared it up eventually, and I was not locked up.
Yeah.
But I was right, and Max was right, and I had to do something and say something because I'd really at first was astounded that he was doing that to Max in front of everybody and accuse him of something that I know he didn't do and had nothing to do with. Shannon actually did it.
See, why would you say that?
Because I had to tell him that I've got to say this about Max and take up for him. So it may not go well, but I've got to do it. It's what's right.
And Shannon wanted to take responsibility for it from the beginning.
Yeah.
Let me just be clear. And I told Shannon, no, you're not going to take responsibility. And then so I was up there potentially going to get arrested. And finally, while I was up there, Mr. Botts and Shannon discussed it. And Shannon convinced Mr. Botts, or maybe Mr. Botts thought it was the right thing to do. He said what really happened.
Was that the start of a beautiful friendship between you and Judge Glanville? Is that what started it all? Would you say?
I like Judge Glanville. I don't know what happened in this case. I don't want to say anything bad about Judge Glanville. And I don't want to be petty. I felt like at some point I kind of became the dog that everyone kicks. And that's fine. I didn't mind that. In fact, in some ways, I think the jury picked up on that.
Mm-hmm.
And that was cool, actually. I was like, that's fine. But
yeah,
it just started to affect things when I couldn't ask questions on cross-examination. And everything was vague, no matter how specific I asked something. And so I never really was like, I think Investigator Gaither, I never really got to ask questions. And that was a little bit frustrating.
Now, just as somebody who watched the trial from afar, the change in judges really seemed to bring about a night and day difference in the trial and just how it was run. I mean, did you guys see that firsthand, and how were your lives affected by the new schedule the judge implemented?
Well, I'll tell you, it went from we're going at a leisurely pace and I am always prepared, because two things happened. Judge Whitaker came on and she did a great job, but she was strict, 9 to 5:30, 2 breaks and a lunch break. And the lunch was, an hour. But the other thing that happened shortly thereafter is all my friends, or most of my friends, their clients took plea deals. And so the overlooked part of that was not only that it eliminated quote unquote defendants, clients, but it eliminated defense attorneys. So the division of labor, like myself and Brian, we had a great division of labor going on. And all of a sudden, my buddy was gone, and Mr. Adams was gone, and the Matthews were gone, and Miss D. Williams was gone, and Gardner, all of them were gone. Bruce. And Mr. Harvey. And then I look over and it's just me and Doug and Mr. Botts and Shaq. And, that changed things because it was all of a sudden a lot more was going to be on us. And we were the only ones. And so, we just kind of looked at each other and said, I guess it's us. Let's do it.
And I think that probably the plea negotiations and all began when Judge Whitaker kind of told the prosecution, y'all have gone too far, and I may grant a mistrial here, which was what everybody was asking for at that time. And she said, I think y'all better have some discussions.
Yes.
And that is the only reason that we were actually brought together. And able to communicate somewhat with the prosecution. So some of them were able to work out deals. And I think in the end, if you think back, is that a jury, they're not supposed to know what happened because they're not allowed to read, see, or do anything. So if you look at it the way it should be looked at, is that they did not know about Thug pleading guilty.
Jeffrey
Williams and everybody pleading, getting deals, pleading guilty to this and that. They may have thought when they came back in and saw only 2 left, and the judge had to tell them, you're not supposed to concern yourself with just what happened. There's just some of them that are not here anymore, and these are the only 2 left. Some of them may have thought that the cases were dismissed against the other people for lack of evidence or whatever. I don't know. And that would have helped us if they're saying, well, if all the rest of them are gone, what are we left with? Why are they still here?
I never looked at it that way. I thought that the jurors would assume that pleas were rendered, but and that can be a negative, right? Like, okay, these
guys are the worst of the worst if they're still here,
or these other guys admitted and these guys aren't. But I kind of viewed it as, you know what, we're the and I'm not throwing shade at anyone else, so please don't take it that way. I support everyone that came to a plea agreement, and the reality is we never had at all a reasonable offer. So that was the difference with us.
Because for the masses, the final offer was 60 years to serve 40, right? And it would reduce the murder counts to involuntary manslaughter. But I mean, so what? When you're
voluntary, but I don't really want to reveal the numbers, but they were astronomical. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
And so we never had any realistic thoughts of pleading. Of course you have to convey the offer, but we gonna fight. And so the way I looked at it is, maybe the jurors, if they have doubts and they're on our side a little bit, maybe they're looking at it not like, oh, everyone else pled guilty because everyone's guilty, but dang, these two guys are standing up strong, and they've straightened their backs and puffed their chests out, and sometimes people like that.
Yeah.
And that's brave to do. And so I viewed it as a potential positive that we were the only 2 there.
Yeah, me too. And ironically, is that Shannon had said to me all along, I wouldn't even take probation.
Stop. Will you stop?
And he got probation.
Mr. Botts, man.
Getting into the gritty of the notes. I see somebody asked, and we've had a lot of requests for this. What was the street state's reaction for the verdict, other than just were their faces just or somebody run out of the courtroom? How did the prosecutors react when the verdict was read?
Ms. Botts, please don't answer this. No. If it's gonna be petty.
It wasn't.
No
reaction.
Please do.
I didn't pay any attention. Certain prosecutors came up to me afterwards and congratulated me, and that was very professional of them.
Yeah. Good. Who do you want to play you in the movie? Is there? I mean,
what movie?
It's not crazy to think that there could be some kind of creative venture on this. Have you guys had any contacts from anybody, or not that you would want to say, but is his Hollywood called?
I'll say no, but I haven't really. I've got so many messages on my phone, and I'm playing catch up. Messages are coming in faster than I can really clear them. But no, I saw something on the internet where people were saying who's going to play who, and they had the transporter guy, and I was like, the transporter guy really does look like me.
Yeah,
maybe that guy.
Yeah,
someone put Matthew McConaughey. Oh man, my mother-in-law would go crazy if that happened.
I wanted to ask about. Did you stay in touch with the other attorneys, because they had to have been prepared for some of the witnesses that were coming up? So, I mean, were you talking to Brian Steele about other witnesses when they were coming up, and what his preparation was for that?
I talked to Brian Steele
every day,
5 times a day. And
Yeah.
and I don't, I hope he doesn't mind me saying this, but the message that he always gave, Brian is a very high energy individual, and he's a very positive individual. And he would just say, "Stay strong. I am so proud of you."
Yeah. Yeah. That leads me to somebody wants to know what it was like to work alongside him. I mean, it was terrible, right? You hated it. Or what can you talk about what it was like to work alongside him? And do you think he's one of the best trial lawyers in the country?
I think he is the best trial lawyer in the country. And the reason I say that is not because of what happens in court, is what happens out of court.
Yeah.
Being with him throughout this process made me better, because I said, how am I going to let Brian do that? And I'm not there with him. So you think a big thing discrediting investigator Viverito, 24M on an end's head. You think that just like comes out of nowhere? That's from Brian or someone else on the team scrolling through so much stuff to figure out exactly what Jeffrey was talking about at that moment, and then linking it up to something that was on the internet at that moment.
Yeah.
And
that's the little Uzi Vert diamond in the head.
And that's just one example, but there's so much stuff that if that time isn't spent outside of court checking behind everything, that flies in front of the jury. And all of a sudden Jeffrey's talking about ordering a hit. But it's all that out of court time, all the people you talk to, the amount of time that you spend with your client going through everything and fully understanding the case. That's what leads to those in-court revelations. And I was able to piggyback, especially dealing with we were able to piggyback, especially dealing with the gang investigators, on a lot of those things that had come up earlier through Brian and Keith's efforts. Mm-hmm. and the team. Trisha Renard was the jury consultant. People were calling her YSL Granny, I think, but she was. People say I knew the discovery, like on the next level, but Trisha knew the discovery on the next level.
And Trisha was the woman that we always saw sitting next. Was she the woman sitting next to Young Thug?
Yeah, or next to Keith. Next
to Keith. And she used to be an ALM reporter, right? Wasn't she at the Daily Report? And,
yes.
The legal newspaper. So kind of segued into legal work that way. But so, I mean, you all become kind of a dysfunctional court family when this all happened. So it had to have been almost kind of like a weird divorce when the other defendants left. But like you said, you were able to all stay in touch with everyone.
Right. And it was just complete support. Nicole Westmoreland would check on me daily. Lamar Gardner, Lamar, all we did the whole time was bicker, fussing each other the whole trial. And then as soon as he was done, he showed me what our relationship really was, because he was checking on me.
Yeah.
So,
well,
and Bruce,
Ali from Tennessee says, watching you during the trial was fascinating. Your passion is one of a kind. I have so much respect, and I cried my eyes out when you and Shannon hugged after the verdict. God bless you. I know we've talked before that you black out in those moments and don't remember it. But I mean, his kids were in the courtroom. His grandmother was in the courtroom. Did you talk to them afterward, or what were those moments like after the hug and before was he taken back to a holding cell still, or how quick
he was and I didn't get to talk to him afterwards because I was just getting pulled in so many directions, but that's why I went out. What was it, yesterday, or I went the day after the verdict, and we had a long talk. But yeah, his grandmother was there, and his kids, and Kayla was there, and other young ladies that are his exes were there supporting him. And but it's really not like, it wasn't a show or anything like that. It was, it was Miss Alexander, and there's another young lady, I don't really want to say her name, but she's known Shannon for probably 15 years, and they used to date, and she showed up. You heard her on some of the jail calls, and it was just like, everyone was getting along, and it was just, and I've tried to stress to Shannon the level of support he had.
Yeah.
Or has, so he fully understands that he's not alone.
Yeah. Yeah. I see somebody say, and of course they're kidding here, but it does remind me of that when you get thrust into the national spotlight and as an attorney in these cases, I mean, are you getting offers to do out of state cases that really are kind of out of your repertoire, or how is your practice expanding here?
Well, I mean, this has happened. I think, I think that probably potential clients, even if they were impressed, they knew that I was very busy at that exact moment. So now, we'll see how things change. But I'm just so grateful that, the bottom line is, in criminal defense, there's cases that you can do a A++++ job and still lose the case. Or, just the strength of the evidence, or, one juror you got wrong. And then there's times where attorneys can do a D- job and win a case.
Yeah.
So it's just, I know the work that we put in on this case. And I'd be lying if I said it wasn't satisfying to see the results reflect the work.
Yeah. Yeah. Somebody says it was incredible watching how hard you worked, and it truly inspired me to put all my into what I do. And I saw some comments like about that with Brian Steele, that somebody just commented that, oh, when you see Brian in court, he's always working on something. I mean, he would have like light moments with Young Thug here and there, but he always seemed like really studious and on that. And one thing, maybe having televised trials will, inspire the academic side of people more. Have you seen that? Because in the end, both of you guys went to school for a long time, right? I mean, it's a very academic job, what you do, reading and writing. You're in court a lot, but you have to know what to talk about, right?
It is. This case is a little different. Like, if I were to say, typically, if someone asked me, what do you want, what trait should I look for in a criminal defense attorney, I would say, you want someone that is humble, you want someone that is quick on their feet, but you also want someone who's likable. This case was a little different because it just had so many different legal issues that were very complex, and we got the RICO aspect of it, which, I'd never done a RICO case, so I was trying to figure it out. So there was a lot of legal issues and case law and research that had to be done quickly and on the spot, that isn't necessarily present in a 1-week trial. And I'm a lot of the times when you were seeing Brian working, I'm going to assume that Brian was foreseeing legal issues that some of us didn't even see yet, and he was already trying to figure out the answers. So, that's just how he is. He's always trying to figure out the next thing that's coming.
I see someone say, Kokumo says to check my DMs, but unfortunately, if it's a DM here on StreamYard, I can't access it. But if he checks his his Twitter DMs or his Instagram DMs, there should be a link to the StreamYard thing. Unfortunately, I need to get a moderator for this to help me out a little bit more, but hopefully we can get him in here. I know everyone would love to hear from him, but and can you remind us all again how you know Mr. Kokumo and his role in the trial? I mean, everyone saw him as the exhibit guy, but
right. Well, he was, he was a lot more than the exhibit guy, and I give him a hard time when he'd mess up the exhibits in court, but it wasn't just the exhibit guy in court. He was putting in long hours, the days, the nights while we were in court, getting all the stuff together for the next day in court. So it wasn't just in court that he was just press and play. He was, because Mr. Botts, let's just say he's not the most computer literate. I definitely am not. Brian is not. So Shaq was very important. But I met him when he was probably 16 or 17. I was at the Fulton County Public Defender's Office. And it was him and two other young men that had a summer internship, and they were supposed to spend like one day with me and then go with someone else. And they just kind of like hung out with me all summer. Everyone started calling the three of them my children. And then Shaq went to Georgia State for undergrad. So I would see him all the time, and he would stop by my office and we stayed in contact. And then, when I was going private, when I said, okay, I need to go private, I called him. I said, hey man, do you know how to design a website for me? And then it was, hey man, can you take some pictures for me for my website? And so then that was more the artistic creative side that he was in. And I knew he wanted to be in law school, go to law school. And then all of a sudden this indictment came down, and one of the people that worked with Brian, Griffin Lale, was going to law school. So it was like he was going to have to be replaced. And I said, Brian, I know this guy named Shaq. He doesn't have any legal training, but he's one of those guys that's like a jack of all trades. He knows how to do everything. And then all of a sudden he's on the team. It just happened like that.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I saw him get on the interview with the jurors that Melanie did. But of course, one other interview that we've seen with the jurors is the alternate, who seemed to take a different stance on things and even indicated she might push a hung jury because of wanting to be not guilty. Did you anticipate that when you were over the trial? Because I mean, as you full well know, 12 people, or I guess it was 15 that you had, or 16, right, aren't going to all have the same opinion. Did you kind of sense who might be for and against you?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. You were not super surprised when you heard that alternate talk?
No.
I was not.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I saw Thugger Daily say that I saw Thugger Daily say that it's the fact that she was an alternate is proof that God might be real. So, and that's all you have to focus on, right? Is that she was not on the jury.
Well, everyone's entitled to her opinion, and she sat for a year, so certainly she's entitled to her opinion. But we were aware of who the alternates were, and there was another alternate that I think would have been probably, if you asked me before the verdict, if I were to say who I want on the jury the most, it was another one of the alternates who I think was on the other show. She was off camera, but I know who she is. Yeah. And I felt that she was our strongest juror, but she was just an alternate. So I knew that she wasn't going to take part in the deliberations, but so it cut both ways. We had people we liked that were alternates as well.
Yeah. See, somebody says, thank you, Max, for being a blessing to SB. And I know Doug Weinstein got into that in his closing about Diamante Kendrick, that you're up against the state. And of course he had help from a couple attorneys too, but in the end, it was always just him up there. I mean, Diamante only had him, and it was the same situation with you two. So kind of just the spotlight of the trial is able to kind of get you guys the thanks you deserve from around the.
Well, thank you. And Doug, I met Doug during this trial. I didn't know Doug beforehand. And Doug's openly said this. This was Doug's first criminal case, which is ridiculous.
So, not just first criminal trial. He'd never done a criminal case before.
No, I think it's first criminal trial.
Okay.
But he's had like 100 different jobs, and he just recently became a criminal defense attorney. But when we were planning the closings, we wanted 2 hours, but the judge said she was going to give the state 6 hours. So the way myself and Doug, we talked about it, and I knew Doug wanted to kind of give a more touchy-feely, humanizing closing. So the understanding was I was going to use some of his time, and I was just going to go through everything I had to say about every piece of evidence.
Yeah.
And in the midst of that, of course, I was going to talk about the Donovan Thomas case where our clients were tethered. So what I said, attacking the credibility of Mr. Copeland and Mr. Zachary and the lack of corroboration and the investigation and McDonald's video and all that stuff, was going to apply to Yak as well. So then Doug was able to kind of focus on more of the closing he wanted to give, which was more of the emotional side, which I thought was very effective.
Yeah, that's what I told Doug before the closing. That day, that morning, I said, just be yourself. They like you the way you are. Be yourself. Don't listen to what other people have told you about how to do a closing or what to say. You just do what you feel is best. And he thanked me after it was over, and obviously he did a great job. And Max did an unbelievable job.
Well, thank you.
And I say this because he knows that I'm retiring.
It's the last rodeo.
Well, I'm ready to go out now, but I was practicing law before Max was born. But I have seen, I have seen what a great lawyer that he is, because we first met on this trial.
Oh, really?
And at first, I was impressed at his amazing memory. When we first met at the jail, he was able to get on the computer and go through and tell Shannon all the witnesses that were in the case, all the co-defendants. I said, how did you know all that? And he had probably only read it one time and knew it. And he's got a photographic memory toward people and events and stuff like that. I'm more of knowing more about people than about the law. But he's just been a great lawyer, did an unbelievable job, and I would not put anybody above him as the best, other than right now, he is the best there is. Yeah. And so I am more than glad to refer all my future business to Max, as long as it pays.
Well, going back to Doug, I think Doug, and thank you, Mr. Boss, that was sweet.
You're welcome.
But going back to Doug, I think Doug probably would have, I think the jurors said, oh, Max was going to fight for Shannon. And that's true. But Doug was the right person to give the emotional thing, because I think if there was a popularity contest, not who's going to fight, not, who's the smartest, but just who do we like the best? Who's the nicest guy? I think Doug probably would have won that vote to the jurors. So, so I think Doug was the right person to give that part of, and I think I was the right person to give we're going to fight the evidence part.
Yeah. I always say you can't really decide if a closing argument is good or bad until after the jury verdict comes back, right?
That is true. That is true.
It was the best argument.
Although when you're sitting there waiting on a verdict, there's so many things that you're like, oh, I wish I said that. I wish I said that. I wish I said that. Especially after you hear this. George, for the people listening, George is a little different. We did not call any witnesses. So in some states, we would have had the last closing. So we would have had the last word. But Georgia, I think that it used to be that way in Georgia.
It used to be.
But Georgia changed the law, so the state always has the last.
Yeah, always has the last.
Nerve-wracking, right? So it's nerve-wracking when you try to condense, because you can't talk for 2 days, so you try to condense it and focus on what's important. But then something that you left on the cutting room floor, like when the state tried to say that Shannon cleaned the car because there was little drops on the. Now I knew that was from the application of the tint when they spray the window, and that was one of those things that I didn't talk about because just time constraints. That was one of the things I didn't think was that central that needed to be discussed. But then the state saying, "Oh, he tried to wash the car and look at the marks on the car." And I knew that wasn't the case. I knew what that was. And I was like, man, I should have said that. But, it's always hindsight 2020 with those things.
Yeah. Well, I do see that we have the world famous Mr. Kokumo in the queue. So I'm gonna bring him
All
up.
right.
Say thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. Sorry for the miscommunication here, but we've got him in the chat, Mr. Kokumo with the U. It's not all O's in there like the Beach Boys wanted to do.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me in here. So,
Max,
Max,
introduce yourself. Can you? I think a lot of people were really touched by your immediate reaction to the verdict because we can see your face the whole time as Shannon and Max are hugging, and you're obviously tearing up. I mean, can you take us inside that moment? What was going on?
Honestly, what it was for me. This was probably one of the most emotional trials that I've ever been through, witnessed, and getting real close with Shannon, getting real close with Max, Bots, and also Doug, and Diamante, where wow, all this argument, all this time spent. I mean, one thing I can say is I think Max brought it up earlier, how he knows the discovery inside and out, all the hard work Max has done and Bots have done, honestly, an accumulation of all that and getting him not guilty on the charges. Some of the charges were hard.
Yeah.
Really
yeah. That somebody asked us to go back to the summer and I'm sure the answer is great, right? You guys are all happy when Brian was arrested for contempt. He deserved it, right?
Well, that was another blackout. Yeah, that was another blackout moment for me because I have no recollection. All I remember is me taking Brian's possessions and texting Colette, but I don't really. That was just one of those, I guess, stressful moments that your brain doesn't retain it.
Did you think that at that moment in time, I mean, you're not thinking about, in 6 months there's going to be a verdict and this is all just going to seem so silly, but how do you compare that moment in the trial to the acquittals and where you are now?
It was, I mean,
versus good.
Nothing compares. I think the Brian being held in contempt, what that did is that drew a lot more attention to this case. It was already a high profile case, but it just got out of control at that point. Yeah. And it became, we became the side that everyone was rooting for, it seemed, where most people were rooting for. Yeah. And that is a unique experience, and it can't be quantified what that means. But I just felt it just gave me a sense that things are going to work out when the public was behind us so strong. Yeah. It just felt like it was going to work out.
But also it was the beginning of the reason the judge was recused. Yes. That was the beginning of it. Yes. That started the whole matter. That changed the whole trial. Yeah. Everything about it. Brian was all of a sudden a hero for standing up for what was right. And a new judge came in and everything changed, as Max has already said. So it was, I didn't like to see it at all. But as it is, he stood up for right, and he's been upheld by everybody as being exactly what he is, just a preeminent lawyer and just somebody that was right and knows the law and did what was right. And the Court of Appeals, threw it right out and said, this is not contempt.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then all of a sudden, they wound up essentially getting us a new judge, which just turned everything around.
yeah. And
So I have to correct, if he had not stood up like that for his rights, we might have been still on trial for another year. I don't know.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And what I saw when the increased attention that this got, we had the original trial watchers, a lot of lawyers and just people around the country became interested in just the idea that a lawyer had been jailed for contempt like that. But then we had the true crime online crowd seem to start paying attention to the trial. But then there's also the conservative MAGA crowd that's upset about Trump's prosecution in Fulton County.
Right.
And it seemed like they really started paying attention to this. So we had this kind of, I don't know if the right word is beautiful, but it was such a diverse group of people
Right.
against this case. It was like, wow, that's remarkable. But I wanted to get to a comment here. Kokumo is going to make a great lawyer. He has some of the best teachers. And can you talk about how, I mean, obviously this case has only inspired you further, right, Jack, to pursue being a lawyer. Where are you in that? And have you taken the LSAT yet?
So I've already taken the LSAT. I did great on the LSAT. Right now, honestly, I'm just waiting for my letter of recommendations from Max.
I've been busy, Shaq. I've been busy. I'm gonna get it. I'm
waiting on my letter of recommendations. I will be submitting all my applications honestly in the next couple of days once those are kind of done. And how this trial has kind of impacted me. I know a lot of people say it all the time where it's like, you've been on a trial for over a year and you've honestly gotten more trial experience than a lot of people in law school. So learning like how to argue different motions, how trial procedures actually work real life. I mean, I think I can classify this as like trial 101, like a trial 101 class.
Oh yeah, you already have more trial experience than probably some of your law professors. So somebody says, am I missing something? Why did the state just kind of jump over the third car? And maybe that's the kind of question that they're talking about right now in their case review meetings or something. But why did the state jump over the third car that pulled up before the U-turn? I've heard others say this too. Because to be clear, there was the third car that pulled up, and then the fourth car behind it is the one that you did the U-turn. But
it's really the fourth car and the fifth car, right? Because there's three of the right. I don't know, but I mean, they make their own decisions, but we didn't ignore that. So that's
how surprised were you, or how excited were you when you during the direct examination when they weren't really addressing that? And Al Hogan even said, "Oh, that's kind of odd that it did that, but didn't expand." Did you see that as a gift to you, or?
Well, that's why, and I don't want to sound ungrateful because that's not my point, but that's why I was kind of like, man, I wish people would stop sending me this information because I know it. But at the same time, if I respond and say, I know, the one thing I know, the state's following my Twitter, right? So if I say, I know, then they know I know. So I was just holding in the back pocket and that's all it was. And, I don't know if people didn't realize it. I don't know if they were making a strategic decision. I can't speculate on that, but I thought it was interesting. And Detective Hogan, I don't. First of all, he's a very nice man.
Seems like it.
And I think he's a good detective. But I think, and he's very honest too. If you saw him on the stand when I asked him questions, he didn't turn it to something else. He answered my question. And I just think one thing that happened in this case, which was unfortunate, was they didn't have the video, and except a FedEx employee had the video, and it was just described to the detectives what the video showed. And so no one in law enforcement saw the video before arrest warrants were taken out. And I thought that was
Wow. Yeah.
where everything went sideways, because obviously the FedEx employee was just like, yeah, 3 cars pulled up on the light and, 1 car didn't move anymore. So that's where things went wrong on that case, in my opinion. And, I made sure that we tried to bring that out to the jury. But yeah, so I can't answer what they were thinking, but we knew what the video showed in our mind, and it was just a matter of conveying that to the jury.
Yeah. Well, I'm a little reluctant to bring this one up just because of the last part, because Adrienne Love is clearly not stupid. She has a lot of problems with her, but she's not stupid. But do you have a favorite witness? My favorite witness personally, when I think back on it all, was Sammy from McDaniel Street. But is there a witness that you found most entertaining? I mean, it's hard for you to find witnesses entertaining when this is a serious job for you, but is there someone that stands out to you as your favorite?
I think I have one.
Okay. Go ahead, Shaq.
Honestly, I can't remember his name because it was so early in the trial, but I think it was, and Max, you could kind of like jump in, the guy who was incarcerated and then begged Judge Glanville to be sent back to prison and kept begging.
That was D'Angelo White.
Yeah, D'Angelo White, I think.
Oh God, yeah. And that we had a little lesser experience watching it online because he wasn't on camera, but it almost kind of added to it because you could hear his chains shaking and stuff as he's like, I mean, that was pretty remarkable. Would you say that one, Max, or
no? And people are gonna think I'm crazy, but I really want things to work out for Mr. Copeland.
Yeah.
I don't know what's happened in the past. I know that, I've said in my closing that this is a sick game. Mm-hmm. And he's someone that was put in a very bad situation. And he came to court and he tried to make the best of the bad situation he was in. But I think I mentioned this earlier, but he clearly loves his daughters, which is I'm always going to respect that. So I just want him to succeed. As odd as that sounds, because
you accused him of murder.
Well, and he, and quite honestly, the lies he told in that interrogation room probably caused about 4 months of work for me. But
inarguably it led to this case. I mean, there were a lot of statements, but so much of this case just seemed built on those statements.
But I've never been in that situation either.
Yeah.
So I'm going to, give him the grace. And because I think what he did say in front of the jury, really, he said it in front of America, which is that way of building this case with just taking people that are at their lowest and just, taking what they say as gospel when they're clearly trying to save themselves. That's just not the way to get to the truth. And so I appreciated that, and I really hope the best for him.
Yeah.
And, I have it on good authority, despite the fact that we went like this in court, that we're good, and I wish him the best.
Yeah. Good. I see somebody say, and I've heard this saying before, yesterday's price is not today's price. But of course, being a criminal defense attorney and wanting to represent the clients that you want to represent, unless you just want to represent a bunch of, people accused of white collar crime in federal court, you're not looking to jack up your rates a bunch because of this, right? I mean, you have to deal with the clients that you have, right?
There's easier ways to make money than criminal defense. I'll put it like that. So I don't think too many of us are in it, just for the money. So I'm so appreciative of just the recognition that people have given me, especially, and the sad thing is, and I'm going to stick up. I was a public defender for many years, and I dealt with my cases as a public defender, exactly the same way I dealt with this case. And Shaq will tell you that, because Shaq worked with me at the public defender's office. Sometimes, unfortunately, I'm not saying all public defenders are great or all are bad. It's a mixed bag, just like private attorneys. But sometimes, unfortunately, I've had big wins as a public defender where no one noticed. No one had any idea of what happened in court. And also sometimes when you don't charge and you're free, it's just assumed you're lesser. So just having this recognition, it just means the world to me that we were able to get a favorable outcome, and the outpouring of support is just unbelievable. So I'm very appreciative of that.
Yeah. I'm going to bring up a question here that reminds me of a comment Judge Whittaker made when she seemed to be referring to some of the online stuff when she talked about people just getting into the details of the trial. But for sure, all the trial watchers know all the details of the case. And somebody Michelle is saying she calls BS on a gun ever even being thrown out of the car. And it says it would have been obvious from the helicopter footage. And of course, this is the gun that Shannon was the only conviction that he had. And can you talk about how you address that? And you had so much to deal with the overall murders. What was the defense on this?
I didn't address that.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, you kind of just acknowledged it.
Well, yeah, I didn't even acknowledge it. I did in my closing argument. I didn't cross-examine any witnesses. Here's the thing. I knew that there was not a mandatory minimum on the gun charge. Even with the recidivist, I knew that Judge Whittaker had the ability to sentence Shannon to time served on it. And Shannon was facing 2 separate murders with life without parole, mandatory on each one. RICO, 20 years, gang charges, another 20 years per gang charge, other gun charges. It was 2 life sentences plus probably 300 years.
Yeah.
I'm not going to blow my credibility on this whole case in front of the jury, arguing that a gun that's registered to Miss Alexander that was found by the police allegedly at Meadowlark Lane, I'm not going to blow my credibility for everything else I said to argue that point. So right. I didn't get up there and say, okay, find my client guilty of count 64, but I didn't mention it at all. And that was very intentional, because that was not a fight I wanted to wage. And that was a fight that we could afford to lose.
Kind of an example of, well, you need to focus on the details, like stuff like this. You also need to focus on the bigger picture. And if you're worried the details are going to cloud the bigger picture, it's kind of best to leave it out. Somebody wants to know where the watch is. I know this was Doug's thing, but
I didn't.
Yeah.
I had so much going on. I didn't have time to worry about the watch. I know that was Doug's thing. I don't know. And I don't like making accusations. My understanding is the watch is missing, but beyond that, I don't know anything about the watch. And quite honestly, probably the one part of the discovery that we don't know about at all is the whole watch saga, because really the search of Mr. Williams' house had absolutely nothing to do with shit. So I just wanted to make it clear that, when that came up, Shannon wasn't there, and none of the guns seized had anything to do with anything Shannon's charged with, and that's it. And so I wasn't worried about the watch.
Yeah. Somebody just wants to say you're all amazing. Thanks for fighting.
Thank you.
The good fight. But I know.
And let me. Can I say one other thing that kind of goes along with the watch, because I feel compelled to say it. A lot of people. There's certain prosecutors that were on this case that are good people. And I know that people are caught up because people direct message me. People are caught up with the drinks, cell phone dump, and think that, because it was on Mr. Abadi's computer. Let me clear this up.
Yeah.
I messed up when I was cross-examining Detective Hogan. I misspoke and said they never collected the phone. They did. Detective Hogan is such a nice guy that he agreed with me. So it wasn't something that was hidden. It wasn't something hidden that everyone caught on about his computer. They handed that over. So that was something that I created just through a mistake. And Detective Hogan, because he's such an agreeable guy, he agreed with me, but that was incorrect. So, and then with the watch thing and certain, there was rumors about certain DAs. None of that has any legs at all. So, there were good people on the other side. I got to know Mr. Atkins is one of the kindest prosecutors you will ever meet.
Yeah.
And he's good. Miss Hilton,
I've known a way of crystallizing things.
Right. And I've known Miss Hilton for some time, and I had a strong disagreement with Miss Hilton once about a case, like a real visceral disagreement with her. And so it's not like I've never disagreed with her, but Miss Hilton's a good person, and she's a good prosecutor. So I hate that some of the negativity that's been thrown their way. I think this was a bad case to bring. I didn't agree with it. I'm so happy that we won. I think justice was served, but I just don't want to disparage groups of people because a lot of the things that we're assuming, it's not 100% accurate.
Well, and it reminds me, as a reporter, you learn this, of course, is no matter how obvious something is, it's just a basic fairness to call the people involved to get comment. But then just because something seems obvious and the proof is there in the documents, there could be another explanation, like you said, for this cell phone dump. It's like, well, the reason the cell phone dump is there is because there actually was a cell phone dump, and there was basically just miscommunication. Right. Or, I mean, Al Hogan perjured himself to say,
well, no, he didn't perjure himself. He basically, I was incorrect, and he's just such a good guy. He assumed that I was correct.
Oh, okay.
And so he went along with it, and then I talked to Simone afterwards, and she was like, you weren't right about that, and I was like, oh dang, I wasn't. Okay. And so I unintentionally created that whole situation.
Well, gosh, man, they're exhausting on there. They're a busy bunch, and they've got a lot to talk about. So I wonder what the posts are going to be like that about now. But that, like you said, it was one challenge to kind of deal with all that, having all those people adding you all the time and wanting to give you advice. But Mr. Bott, I don't know I can't remember if we addressed this, but did you have a favorite witness or most memorable witness?
Well, I mean, certainly I'd have to agree with him that Woody was the most entertaining. But other than that, I didn't have a favorite witness because they were all against us.
Well, that's not true.
Well, I know, but I mean, the fact witness is a fact witness, and I appreciate them saying a fact, but that doesn't make them a favorite. But no, you have to put them all in the same category, really. And if they're a favorite, that's because they're telling the truth. But if they're not telling the truth, it's hard for them to be a favorite.
One of my other favorites was when I call her Polka. That's her nickname. That's Taisha Alexander.
Yeah.
I kind of soft pedaled it. I was like, and then, these people tried to rob you on March 9th, 2022, and then you shot at them. And she said, no, I shot them. And I was like, okay. And, but she was, I've seen a video of that incident. She was 100%. It was 100% self-defense. It was ridiculous what led to it. But she was quick to correct me. No, I didn't shoot at him. I shot him. So
she was also the first one to say that, yes, I know Shannon. He's the best thing. I'm the best thing he ever had.
I'm the one of the prettiest girls he's ever had. Now, I appreciate somebody who had to watch this online. Appreciate the fact that the microphone or the camera hadn't actually cut in when she said that, and Simone repeated it for the record for us at home. She said, "Oh, talk, girl. You said you're the prettiest girl he ever had." It's like, oh, thank you, Simone. We needed that. light moments like that. But like Mr. Bott said, it's hard to like these people or be too entertained by them when they're overall not good witnesses for you, or supposedly on paper they're not supposed to be good witnesses for you. But this was a funny moment. What about Woody asking Jeffrey a question while on the stand? Was there a lot of interaction much? Because you had so many people in the courtroom. What was the interaction like on there?
Oh, that was funny. And it was, these guys were, to keep their spirits up. Like, I could just imagine being in their situation and just being like, just stiff. And I remember when the backdrop of this is, Kenneth Copeland's testifying and he's coming to bury us, and like, it's time to fight. And he turns and says, I don't know, Jeffrey, what do you, whatever the question was, he says, ask him. And it was just a funny, and I just saw Jeffrey just bust out laughing.
I think it was the rich homie. Are you still cool with Rich Homie?
Right.
Yeah.
And he's like, I don't know, ask Jeffrey. Jeffrey, are you cool with Rich Homie? And Jeffrey just busted out laughing. And then that was kind of gave everyone else the ability to laugh too.
Yeah. One thing that struck me early on in the trial, and I think it was during Tick's testimony, was in the end, I mean, all these guys were really good friends. They all grew up together. And with Tick's probation and Young Thug's probation, I mean, they're not supposed to have any contact with each other. And we heard that reiterated during Pee Wee Roscoe's plea hearing yesterday. And that's going to be the same with Shannon. I mean, how is that for them? And because in the end, they were friends, right? Is that something that you've talked about with Shannon? Just fact that he can't talk to him for all these years?
Well, actually, Shannon does not have those conditions on his probation. He doesn't have.
Because it's not a gang charge, right? Because it's just a gang charge, so it's not a gang.
He doesn't have any special conditions, okay. So he does. But Shannon's not trying to. Shannon's moving on. But with all these guys, part of preparing with Brian is, you talk to everyone. And a lot of these guys, it's just like this stuff from when they were, they're 30, they got kids, they're trying to get a job with their record. I mean, that wasn't that, it was Mr. Stevens, Tick. Mm-hmm. That wasn't, when he was saying I'm tired, that wasn't like an act. Like, he was working all day and all night and then coming to testify, and he's just trying to get a normal life. And they were all being dragged into something from when they were 15, 16, 17. And, and that's why I disagreed with Mr. Botts a little bit about all the witnesses were, against us. I think that a lot of these guys were just in a tough situation and they needed to do what was right for them. But I don't think that they came to bury us at all. And it was just, and I felt bad for them. I felt bad for them being in that situation where, they have to say certain things to get out of jail. It never sat right with me. And, Mr. Stevens, I got to know, Mr. Murphy, I got to know, and so many others. And, I just felt bad for the situation they're in now. And if I could do anything to help any of these people, I would. And we all would.
Yeah. And that kind of brings up another issue here. The constitutional right to a speedy trial shouldn't just be the time to bring a case, but the duration of the trials. The state shouldn't be able to bankrupt 99.9% by prolonging the case. Is that an issue that you had? I mean, clearly you're not in this for the money. No defense attorney could have been doing this case for the money. But in the end, you got to eat and pay your mortgage, and having a huge long trial like this had to have been a drain on everyone's resources. How did you guys deal with that?
I'm not going to let you answer this, Mr. Botts. No, we don't want Mr. Botts. Don't answer this. Don't answer this. Don't answer this. Mr. Botts has like a garage full of 20 cars. Money's not going to get you with Mr. Botts. But I mean, it's just a commitment that you make. I didn't I mean, I'd be lying if I thought it was going to last 2+ years. What really went sideways was the jury selection. We went through 2,000 witnesses,
Crazy.
and then we only got up to 500 to pick the jury. So we wasted 6 months probably going through those other 1,500 jurors, and that's 6 months when you're at work supposed to be making money. So, but it's a commitment. Like, you make that commitment and you stick by it, thick or thin. And, I knew that by the time I was getting on the case that it was going to be a RICO. Some of the other attorneys, if you think about it, they might not even realize it. I don't know this to be a fact, but like the Matthews, they represented Mr. Huey beforehand. So they might have just been signing up for an armed robbery. And then all of a sudden it's indicted differently and he's on this massive case.
Yeah.
But they stuck with him, which is beyond admirable, because they could have tried to get off, but they stuck with him.
Yeah.
And they weren't the only attorneys. So there was a lot of sacrifice that attorneys made, and definitely I'm not at the top of the list, but there was a lot of sacrifices that other attorneys made for clients that should not go unnoticed.
We did talk about this earlier, just kind of the ripple effects of your defense attorney skills here affecting the other cases, but we're reminded that 6 defendants had their RICO charges dropped today. And I know we talked about this earlier, but I mean, obviously that's a good thing, right? I mean, you're happy to see that.
I am. Unfortunately, several of those people are already doing life sentences. So that might have been part of the calculation. I know Mr. Myrick is already doing a life sentence. Mr. Blaylock, Mr. Blaylock is already doing a life sentence. I'm not sure about Khalif Adams. Yeah. But so that's sad. I was sad for Lil Rod. Just seeing him in there, with his GED book, studying for the GED during the trial, and he's got an appeal pending. So I'm hoping for the best for Lil Rod, because I mean, he was so young, but it's sad. There's a lot of lost life, either through death or through incarceration, that just emanates from this trial.
Yeah. Somebody's asking about closings, and what I noticed was, just based on the jury's questions, I mean, Hilton's closing was somewhat effective in that the jury seemed to be focusing on the stuff that she brought their attention to. It just wasn't enough jurors. What did you think about the closing? Well, I guess it was technically the rebuttal that she gave, but what did you think about that?
I thought she made a good closing. However, I think she made it too late in the trial. I think that, well, I don't mean the closing too late, but I think it was too little too late, or too much too late, whatever. I think the jury had pretty much already made up their mind a lot after Max and during the duration of having to sit there all that time. And they pretty much told us that when we went back in the back. But overall, I think she made a good closing, a lot better than the other prosecutor.
Well, what I thought was important, she gave a very passionate closing. I knew what she was doing. I was hoping that the jurors saw it the way I was hoping they were going to see it, which was, it was essentially, and it was great, but it was kind of like a Hail Mary to try to make up for lost times, as Mr. Box was saying. But with that emotional appeal, I thought it was, I'm probably going to mess up my dates, but my recollection is that was right before the Thanksgiving break. So I was concerned about if that emotional appeal was made, and then the jurors were going to like immediately decide. But they had the Thanksgiving break to kind of bring them back to reality and let that emotional appeal kind of dissipate and get back to the evidence. And once I knew that we were into that Thanksgiving break and they were going to be thinking on it, I felt a lot better about the situation.
Yeah. And somebody says the way, this is Queen Valerie, says the way Bots feels about the witnesses is how we feel about the state. They were against the men we were fighting for. I love you, Bots. But the
thank you.
Yeah, I mean, and I think the answer to this is clearly no. But can you help with getting Montauk out? I mean, is there any kind of appeal options for him on this probation revocation that landed him in prison for 5 years?
I think that there may be. It's not lost on me that he's serving about as much time as anyone that was on this case at this point. And it's sad because it seems like, as a Judge Whitaker acknowledged, that he was kind of turned the page in his life already and was doing what he was supposed to be doing. So I think that there's probably something that can be done. I don't think it's necessarily, it would be a little bit messy for any of the attorneys involved in the case to be the ones that argue for him. I think that there's probably some conflicts.
Yeah. And somebody asked about how, let me see if I can pull it up, how does it feel being defense attorneys and the public being on your side? Last question, I promise, but we'll do that one as I find the other one.
It's a good way for me to go out
Yeah.
and retire. I really appreciate it. I couldn't have asked for anything better. And Max has got many more victories, and I hope that his last case is kind of like Ted Williams hitting a home run at his last at bat. I hope Max can do this.
Meghann gets that baseball reference.
She's yes. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry.
She's a big baseball fan.
Yeah. And you've done so many trials in Georgia, and it seems like they have really open camera rules. Had you done high-profile cases that were really big deals in Atlanta, or was this just the biggest case that you'd had?
Me?
Yeah, Mr. Bots. Had you had?
Well, I worked on the Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil down in Savannah with Jim Williams. Trial.
Oh wow! Well, when was that? What trial was that?
A long time ago.
Yeah, that sounds. And I know you probably can't talk about this too much, just not directly being their attorneys. But how does the verdict impact the others who are at the store? I mean, or the others who are charged in this? I mean, I guess the answer is it could lead to the negotiations that we saw. We just saw some charges dropped, but I mean, if Demekion Garlington goes to trial, the fact that these two were acquitted isn't going to come in, is it?
No, that won't come in. The disadvantage that they have now is kind of, I've played the card, so they're going to have to deal with that. But at the same time, at least for Mr. Farley, there's not some of the other potentially difficult pieces of evidence that they have to deal with. Mr. Farley has, to my knowledge, no record at all. He was just someone who made clothing and would show up at the studio and get people to wear the clothing and then sell the clothing. He was just a young entrepreneur. And, I've gotten to know him, and he's just an everyday guy. And somehow he's in the middle of this situation. So I feel for him. I got to say hi to Demekion the other day when we were waiting on a verdict.
Yeah.
Just to give him a little interaction with someone, because he was waiting on his attorneys. And I wish everyone the best. I mean, nothing is going to be gained through wrongfully incarcerating people. And And so we just gotta, I'm hoping for the best, and I just hope everyone involved can move forward.
Yeah, please. Somebody has a question for you, Mr. Kokumo. What have you taken away from this trial for the future? I mean, we were talking about earlier, I think you have more trial experience than any law professor that you're sitting in front of now. Maybe not, but yeah. What are your big takeaways?
Specifically from this trial, I think it's trial etiquette, trial procedure, and what to really focus on and how to really argue and what works. I think my favorite part of this trial, all in all, and it had to come at the end, was talking to the jurors to see what disadvantages and advantages we all had as attorneys, from the prosecution side to the defense side, what certain prosecutors did and what certain defense attorneys did that really influenced them and built all in all the case. So trial procedure, I think, is kind of the biggest thing, like how to file motions, what goes on motions, what case law, what you should do. One thing I loved about Brian is how particular he was with case laws and how to find case laws that apply to certain rulings. So
yeah, that's the key. Lawyers are nothing without actual law to cite. So if you can get some ammunition for your arguments, you're even better there. So somebody wants to know how you maintain sanity during the Glanville and Love era, and I'll expand on this by saying, is there something to be said that just the chaoticness of that of that period and all the comfort breaks that Glanville had, which the jurors, as we've seen in their interviews, clearly did not like, did that actually kind of benefit the defense because it just emphasized how chaotic the prosecutor's case was? Or would you have rather have just had Judge Whittaker on the case the entire time?
I think that there were advantages for it happening the way it happened. Yeah. I was actually surprised that the jurors didn't really put together what happened, what was behind the judge change, because we got into the ex parte in front of the jury, briefly, and I thought that they had picked up on it. I could tell by looking at the jurors that, and I already touched upon this, that they did not always appreciate the way that defense attorneys were being treated. I think in particular myself and Brian, and I could see it in their face. So part of me was okay with that because we were the underdogs at that point. But I was just surprised that they didn't pick up on it. But, I think it worked out the way it was supposed to work out. Certainly if having Judge Whittaker take over, it added more structure, but it also sped things up.
Yeah.
And that was fine when it was 8 of us, but when it became Mr. Botts, myself, and Doug and Shaq against the whole state, then that speed was a little bit hectic at times.
Yeah. What was the discussion like when you decided not to call any witnesses? Was there much of a discussion that, hey, maybe we have some stuff we should put on, or did you just decide we don't want to keep these people here any longer?
There were some things that we could have brought out. There was some things about the McDonald's video that we had a witness ready to testify about that. There's a great, ironically, I went to high school with this gentleman, Eric Nielsen. I don't know how we both end up in the same place professionally, because we both went to a small public high school in Connecticut where there was like 250 kids in the whole school. And somehow we end up, through the universe, ending up on cases together constantly, just organically. And we had him. He was going to come in and testify as an expert in, the history of music and hip hop. But ultimately, we decided the jurors had been there for a long time, and there was a value to just say, no, we're not calling anyone because the state hasn't proven their case.
Yeah, there's nothing to address.
And it was funny because, and Judge Whitaker, I think, caught it. She said something like, does Mr. Stillwell have anyone to call as a witness? And I said, well, we are choosing not to call any witnesses. Yeah. And then she corrected herself and said, okay, yes, Mr. Stillwell is choosing not to call any witnesses. And that was really the difference. We had people to call, but we made the choice not to call any witnesses.
Yeah. Yeah. And regarding Diamante, you know, can Yak make music with Thug or communicate? You know, I can answer this. He can't, because although Diamante doesn't have any restrictions like that, Young Thug, well, actually no, because they could talk for music purposes. There is a exception in his probation, Young Thug's probation, to allow him to communicate with people for music purposes, and it's specified Gunna and someone else. It didn't specify Yak, but sorry, do you know if he can make music with Yak?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question.
See if we can get Doug on to
I really hope that in the future, because Shannon wants to get into music too, and I just really, and he still has dreams of, and I know that, you know, it might not be for everyone, but people like Lizard Walk. I thought it was catchy. But, you know, I've just talked to Shannon. I say, man, you got a unique story now. You stood up against the state of Georgia in the longest trial, and there's so much, you have a story to tell, and it's so much more interesting than ops and AKs and shooting people and homicide and all the rest. And I was like, you know, tell your story, man. Don't tell the story that everyone wants you to tell, or they say is in style. Because, you know, you're 30, man. You got kids. Tell your story. So I'm hopeful that Shannon and Yak continue to be creative and enjoy making music. But I'm hopeful that they grasp their stories, and they're faithful to their stories.
Yeah. No, I think that would be great. I can't even imagine the viral insanity that would ensue if he wrote a song about the trial. If there was like a Judge Glanville reference and a Judge Whitaker reference and a Christina Weaver reference, I mean, people would just, it would be insane.
I'm pretty sure we're going to get some references from one of these artists.
Yeah. And then another question I think I can answer. That's yes, right? You went to University of South Carolina, the USC of the South.
The real USC.
Yeah.
Also, the most overlooked team by the college football selection committee.
Oh, right. Go Ducks.
I can't believe that we are being left out of the playoffs, it appears. But yes, I'm a proud University of South Carolina Gamecock.
Yeah, I'm Georgia.
And again, did you hear about some of the actors the public shows? You know, people drop in and drop out. So we addressed this earlier, but you've seen the movie lineups that people have made for the trial, right?
We have.
You approve of, don't approve. Gosh, what else should we cover? I don't want to just keep. I feel like we really could just stay here all day talking about this, but we've already been.
I just want the public to know that we really appreciated all the support. Of course, the press. We appreciated your support, Meghann, and Thugger Daily, and so many of the people in the press. But honestly, the feeling, I did not anticipate, you know, that the state leading up to this case was really portraying us as the worst of the worst. Yeah. And we were trying to figure out how to neutralize that so we would get the public to be neutral. I did not anticipate what was to come, where a large segment of the public was behind us 100%. And that really, you can't specifically say how it made a difference, but I am convinced it made a difference. That's just how the universe works. And so we are so appreciative. And, on behalf of Shannon, we are going to do everything we can to pay back the grace and support that we've been given, and try to make something of this life.
Wow. Good. Well, that's great to hear. I mean, I'm sure everyone here just wants nothing but the best for him. I mean, we're all waiting to see what happens, and, waiting to see how his cases get resolved and everything. So we will keep following that. And,
and I'll let you know as soon as I have some more information on that, but I'm optimistic.
Yeah. Please do. Well, I think we'll sign off. I'll get somebody out here. Somebody says they always had your back in the Fox Live stream. A lot of people are going to be, I mean, myself included, I spent so much time with the trial that we're all going to be having some free days now, but everybody's still following the case and wanting to know what happens. So we'll still keep following that. And thank you guys so much for taking time out of your day to talk to us.
Thank you. Thank you, Meghann.
Thank you so much for having us. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, you guys. Thank you.
Hey.
Go ahead and sign off, guys. Thanks.